necessary is that potentially they've been around for a while. They actually know people within the organization. They actually know what actually goes on within the organization. They are not afraid necessarily to challenge a few ideas, because that will help spark other ideas moving forward. So basically, just good people who've been around for a while, who are interested in the concept of customer experience. One of the first questions will be, which journey, which customer experience are we going to look at? This seems like a very simple question, but actually it's, for most organizations, quite difficult. And essentially you can choose one of two methods. One method is to think about, of all the experiences that we offer, of all the services, perhaps if that's your language, that we offer, which are the key or primary experiences, and then think about working on those in priority order. That works because there's the obvious bit, you're talking about the priority experiences. The drawback to that particular method is that perhaps your most crucial key experience is one that doesn't need a lot of work. So obviously you just move down that list. The good thing about that is that it's quite clear why you're working on those particular experiences. The second method is to think about which experiences that you offer have the biggest problems. So if you have lots of customer complaints about a certain particular experience, that might give you some clues as to which ones you want to work on. So what kinds of materials are needed to set up for this? We have several. They're really quite simple. We have several. One, you'll need to use print out some survey instruments, basically some questionnaires. So having access to copy or have them shipped from wherever is one thing. I think that's quite straightforward. During the exercise, the assessment itself, of course, it's useful if you can have pens, clipboards ready. If people are going to take these surveys kind of ad hoc, just walking around, you might want to make sure that they have the available necessary essentials to take the survey. So a person is just there walking around, they happen to say, yes, I'll participate in your survey. You hand them a clipboard and a pen and say, please take your few minutes to answer this question. If you're lucky, in some sites, I assume there might be tables somewhere close by that people to lean on. If not, then you have the clipboards at the ready. So that's one thing. For the actual brown paper, which is sort of the bulk of the exercise, then one thing you need is the brown paper itself. You'll probably need some card stock, and you'll probably need some ready-made idea cards. You've seen those in the video of the Madrid experience, but as you can see in the following little clip here, you see people standing around this brown paper, and what you notice is they're writing on these things that we're calling idea cards, which is essentially just pre-printed clips of paper that people are able to write their ideas on. So you need all that printed out. To put these ideas, to literally put them on this brown paper, we will need glue stick. So lots and lots of glue stick that you'll need for the brown paper. The other thing that you'll need is some sort of masking tape, carpenter's tape, that sort of thing, because the brown paper is on the wall essentially. So you need something that doesn't permanently damage the wall, but allows you to have the paper hanging from the wall for 2 or 3 days. One question is, how long should the assessment itself last? How long does this process take? Well, that in effect is dependent on the size of the site that you're looking at. If it were a very small site, let's just say, a few people, probably you can do this all in 1 day. But as a general rule of thumb, let's think of it this way. When you have this brown paper up, roughly speaking, one person who's managing the brown paper, a practitioner, one practitioner, probably can handle something like 6 to 8, maybe 10 people at one time. Given that that means, roughly speaking, in a day, 80 or so people max can go through a brown paper. We're now saying if a site is going to have something like 80 people or more, slightly more, a day to 2 days is going to be enough. If you're thinking it's going to be a bit more than 80, 120, 150 people potentially coming through the site, then you might be thinking about 2 to 3 days. And again, if you're lucky enough to include actual customers participating as well, then you might want to increase that a bit. So essentially it's 2 to 3 days. As a contingency, you might allow for 3 days, but knowing that you're definitely going to do it for 2 days. If you're at a very small site, 1 day probably is enough. So the rule is set at looking at how many people you think you might need to go through the site, how many people can go through the site, and of course hours is another thing. If the site is open beyond sort of 9 to 5, you might want to have some of the time where you're there during the after hours so that you capture that aspect of the experience as well. How many people should be involved in this? Well, we know we will have a practitioner who was trained to do this exercise. They have already been through the exercise when we did the pilot study in Madrid. They may, of course, need help with on-site staff. And by this help, we really mean a point person or two on-site who can help recruit people who sort of know, if it's in a different language, who may know that language, who can help out recruiting employees to participate, who can help set up meetings and so forth, telephone conferences ahead of the actual assessment itself. So actually, I think you need at least one person on site who's helping out on this. That person, of course, should be nominated and approved by the management of the site so that they actually can spend time doing some of this work. How much time is needed? While the actual brown paper is going on, the practitioner is the main and primary person who's staffing, who's basically manning the brown paper itself. But the on-site person may be there, probably is the person who's going to help and do most of the recruiting of customers. They know their people well enough, so that person is there. So essentially, during the assessment phase, the on-site person should be there, if at all possible, right along with the practitioner. Before the actual exercise, what probably needs to happen is the practitioner is sending in, for example, the Madrid video, which demonstrates the kind of work that we're doing. The on-site person can show this around to colleagues, the management at the site, to say this is what will be happening here. We need you guys to participate. Each site will have a slightly different method of getting people to participate. At some sites, I assume they might need to be scheduled, as in you 5 people will come here at 10 o'clock in the morning and spend an hour. The next 5 comes at 11, and so on and so forth. At other sites, it will be much more open. We have this brown paper, and can you guys just come by and turn up for the brown paper while it's there? A bit more ad hoc. Another question is, where do we place the brown paper itself? Where does the brown paper actually go? The best option is to have it in a high traffic area at the site. So a hallway leading to the cafeteria or the toilets, for example. The second best option is to hold it in a room or a meeting room. And if you do that, scheduling people throughout the day to participate in the session itself. So, how much space is required? Once you've decided on the experience, that experience will then need to be broken down into a number of steps. The practitioners will work with the on-site expert to determine the steps in that process. These are usually quite logical. We're talking 6 to 8 steps, potentially a few more. It's not a big issue. I think at the Madrid site we had something like 10 or 12 steps. We don't want 20, 25 steps. We don't want 2 or 3. Something in between reasonable makes sense. So for each step, we're going to have essentially a panel